Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Nathalie Paquet, and I will be your webinar moderator today. Welcome to this 1010 webinar. Today we will present you the latest changes in the internal regulations parts 2 and part 3. And to guide you through this presentation, I'm here with my colleagues, Matthew Tomlin, the unit manager of the publication service, and Michael Bungert, our Deputy Director in the Standards Department. And now it's time to give the floor to the speakers of today. I think that Michael will begin, so
Yes.
Michael, the floor is yours.
Good morning, thank you. As already announced, I will give you a brief information about the latest changes in the new edition of our IR2 about common rules for standardization work. Let's start with changes in working groups. There is a subclause 3.4 which informs about working groups, and in this subclause there's a paragraph informing about establishment and function, and here we have a more clearly distinguishing between working groups and ad hoc groups. This is done by adding a footnote which is underneath this new clause, and the footnote says an ad hoc group is restricted to experts appointed by the CEN/CENELEC national members or by organizations having observer status in the parent bodies. Let's go now to another change which is related to the reporting line of joint TCs and working groups. The responsibility to create a joint technical committee shifted from the presidential committee to the technical board, and this is now a change in the subclause 4.2.131. Just a footnote for you. There was recently a BT decision to have in the future only joint CEN/CENELEC technical committees. That means in the new release of the internal regulation part 2 we will remove the information about joint working groups. Let's skip now to the decisions and vote. For clause 6 voting policy, we add under the clause 6.1.4 more cases about votes done by correspondence. In addition to approval of ENs and HDs, TS or initiation of a new work item, we added the approval of standardization requests from the European Commission and the approval by the technical body of justified limited technical changes to the text of a draft standard. Now we speak about counting of votes. This is in clause 6.2. Now we have two different ways of counting votes. For CENELEC it remains the same. That means CENELEC follows the Nice Treaty. It means everything remains the same. Simple majority and 71% or more of the weighted votes cast are in favor. The only changes here are that in Annex D, this is only applicable for CENELEC only, and because CEN changes to the Lisbon Treaty. That means here a proposal is adopted if 55% or more of the votes cast are in favor, and if the population of the countries of the members having voted positively reaches 65% or more of the population of the countries of all members having voted. Okay, for your information, the number about the population or the figures are taken from the World Bank statistics, and this number is updated each time in the Guide 21. Now let's go to preparation of European standards under clause 11.2. We follow the international approach, and that means we change from month to weeks. That means in all expressions in procedures are now in weeks. We removed all references to PQ and UQs completely from IR2, and what is new, we inserted the procedure for skipping of formal vote by TCs. As a very positive information, it was possible to align the CEN and CENELEC procedure in terms of skipping the formal vote for CEN and CENELEC. That means the technical committee may decide to skip the formal vote and to proceed directly to publication. For CEN and CENELEC, it's now here the same procedure. And as additional information, the formal vote is now 8 weeks. It's not allowed to extend this period of 8 weeks. Last but not least, there was also a change in the UAP. The paragraph was simplified in terms of wording, and an additional note was added to show the differences between CEN and CENELEC. The note was added underneath the subclause 11.242, which says, in CEN, technical board approval is required where a technical committee wishes either to follow the UAP track for the development of a new work item, or to change the CEN inquiry and formal vote track to the UAP track for an already existing work item. Also here there was a change from months to weeks. The submission of the document by the CENELEC Management Center to the members is now 12 weeks instead of 5 months. This was now the information about internal regulation part 2. I want to give the floor to Matthew Tomlin, who will inform you about internal regulation part 3.
Thanks very much, Michael. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to go through now the changes in our new edition of the Internal Regulations Part 3. This set of regulations sets out the principles and the rules for the structure and drafting of CEN and CENELEC documents, and it's worth noting that this set of internal regulations is based on the ISO IEC directives Part 2, but they are modified slightly for European specifications. Now, the first thing to mention is that the new IR3 has a very simplified structure, and it makes the information basically a lot easier to find. And these screenshots of the table of contents show that there's a new grouping of the elements compared to the previous edition. For example, general principles are grouped together, such as the objectives of standardization, the verbal forms for expressions of provisions, referencing. There's a group of for subdivisions of the document, so your typical foreword, introduction, normative references, terms and definitions. Then it goes into detail on the components of the text, looking at, for example, notes, formula, tables. Policy matters are now grouped together, and then there's also a set of annexes at the end. Now, this simplified structure, helping you find information easier, goes further when you're looking at the subdivisions of the document. For example, here in the foreword, we have purpose or rationale. Is it normative or informative? Mandatory, conditional or optional? Information about the numbering and subdivision, and specific principles and rules. And this pattern follows throughout the document for each of these subdivisions. So just making the information quite clear. You will see some vertical bars in the margins. Now they actually indicate the modifications that have been made to the ISO IEC directives Part 2. You will also see these vertical bars in the Internal Regulations Part 2 that Michael's just introduced. These are a little bit different. These are showing in IR2 the differences regarding the previous version. But here in IR3, these bars show the differences that have been made compared to ISO IEC Directives Part 2. Now, let me just recap some of the main changes in the new edition of IR3. The scope, the normative references, and the terms and definitions clauses are all mandatory now, so they must appear in your document. I'll go into more detail on that in the next slides. In addition, in the scope, it's no longer allowed to have any recommendations. So now no permissions, no recommendations, no requirements allowed in the scope. They should just be statements of fact, basically, in the scopes. Something to note in the European forward now, it's not obliged to list all parts of a series. So those of you who have very large series, you can breathe a sigh of relief. You don't have to list all 20 or 30 parts in the European forward anymore. you may wish to do that. It's up to you. There's also increased guidance on drawings, on graphical symbols and on flowcharts that you'll find useful, and also increased guidance on permitted reference documents. That's in clause 10. You might notice that there's no more information on patent rights specifically. That's been actually removed. That was a decision that was taken to remove this information because it's already found in the ISO IEC Directives Part 1. So you may refer to that document for specific information on patent rights. In addition, in CEN and CENELEC, we've got CEN-CENELEC Guide 8, which gives information related to patent rights. And finally, there's also increased guidance on measurement and test methods. And specifically related to that, you'll see that in subclause 18.5.8, you've got some useful information to help you structure your test reports. And these bullet points show the information that should at least be mentioned in any test report that you give. Now let's turn back to normative references. As I mentioned before, normative references are now mandatory. So you have to have a clause 2, as it normally appears in the document. You have to have a clause 2 in your document, even if it contains no normative references. And it's very important that you keep a clause 2, because if you find yourself having to add it later, if you've missed it out, you'll find that your whole numbering of the standard will have to be rejigged, updated, and that can have a big impact on any cross-references. So don't forget your clause 2. Now, when you have normative references, the clause 2 has to be introduced by the following wording. Some of you will recognize this. It's been changed ever so slightly. If you don't have any normative references, you still need a clause 2, but you can just add this text stating that there are no normative references in this document. And the very same actually happens now for terms and definitions. Normally this appears as clause 3. You've got to have a clause 3 for terms and definitions. It's a mandatory clause now, even if you've got no terminological entries in your standard. Now, there is a set wording for the introduction of clause 3. This screenshot's actually taken from our new CEN Simplified template that's been recently made available. It'll soon be made available for CENELEC. The reason why we chose this screenshot is it just gives a better picture of what the introductory text will look like, although this is all very clearly given in the IR3. Just a note, you'll see here that there are some bullet points here. There's an informative reference to the IEC and the ISO sources for terminological references. Both organizations at international level have these databases. So this information is given purely for your information. You may wish to, and any user may wish to browse through the agreed terms and definitions found on these platforms. Also in IR3 we have a new annex which is a checklist for writers and editors of documents, and we like this a lot. We hope you do too. We think you'll find it very useful. You should apply it when you're drafting your standard. It will help you make sure that you've not missed anything crucial out. For example, it'll give guidance for tables. It'll help you check whether you've given each table a concise title, if you've numbered each table correctly, have you cross-referred tables in your document. So this is a really useful checklist which is new in IR3. And finally, when do you have to start using IR3? Well, you can start using it now. It's been approved by the General Assemblies. But of course there is a transitional moment because people are always drafting standards. So there's a set date now for the 1st of July, whereby these internal regulations are applicable to all inquiry and final drafts registered. Now, what does that in fact mean? Well, any incoming draft that you're going to deliver to CCMC should be in line with the new IR3 as from this date. I'm going to hand back to Michael now because we're just going to recap 5 key learning points from today's webinar.
Okay. I start with my key learning points. The first one was new voting principles in CEN based on the Lisbon Treaty. The second, possibility to skip the formal vote by TC decision. And I give to Matthew back.
Yeah, and just 3 key points for the IR3. There's a new helpful checklist for standard drafters in the Annex A. The new IR3 has a new simplified structure, and it helps making find the information a lot more easy. And finally, don't forget, now the scope, the normative references and the terms and definition clauses are mandatory. Thank you very much.